We have a double header.
Tagline, double your pleasure, double your fun.
Double your pleasure, double your fun. So tonight we have a similar idea. But instead of, it's not just all fun and games, although we do have some of that. The discussions that we have are all about finding insight and meaning from the Torah, specifically from the Torah portion. Well, this week we have a double portion. We have Chukat and Balak. By the way, the reason that this is significant this week is because ever since the holiday of Shavuot, which was just about a month ago, just a little over a month ago. So since then, we've been off a week, Torah portion-wise, from Israel. So just to give you a very quick, did I mention this last week? I did not mention this, right? Okay. Basically, many holidays in the diaspora are 2 days, when in Israel it's 1 day. Shavuot is an example of this. So Shavuot in Eretz Yisrael, in the Holy Land, was on Friday. And it was also here, the first day was on Friday. But in the diaspora, we had Friday and Saturday, or Friday and Shabbat, which means that on Shabbat, instead of reading the normal weekly Torah portion cycle, we read a special reading for the holiday of Shavuot in the diaspora. But in Israel, that holiday was so 1 day ago, it was so yesterday. By Saturday, they were already back onto the normal cycle of Torah readings, and they got ahead by a week. So we're catching up this week. In Israel, it is just the Torah portion of Balak. In the diaspora, we have a double header to catch up. We have Chukat and Balak. We have to make up an extra portion. We have the double portion. Hope that made sense. That's just the scheduling calendar, little insight just so you know what's going on. So the good news is all the Jewish people are back on the same page as of this week, and that feels good. Okay, let's talk about a major theme from this week's Torah portion. So in the Torah portion of Chukat, it opens up with the discussion of the red heifer, which is considered to be the ultimate super rational decree of the Torah. Okay, fine. So it talks about the red heifer. But then at a certain point in time, it talks about the passing of Miriam. And I need to explain that the Torah jumps about 40 years in its narrative. It talks about, of course, the Exodus and the incidents after the Exodus, right, including splitting of the sea, the giving of the Torah at Sinai, the golden calf. And then it talks about the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the dedication of the tabernacle, and how they kind of got into that. The story of the spies, which we read a few weeks ago, and God's decree to wander for 40 years. But most of the narrative of what happened during those 40 years is not recorded in the Torah. What did they do? They were in a holding pattern. You ever take a flight and you're about to land and then suddenly the plane pulls up? You ever have that? I always find that like a little bit annoying, right? It's like, oh, we were so close. We were about, like I saw it, like we were right there, and then whoop, back into the sky. And you circle until you get clearance. Well, the Jews were set to go into Israel. And then the episode of the spies. And that generation said they don't want to go in. And God says, okay, I'm not going to force you. And so for the next 40 years, they're in this holding pattern. And if you look at the journeys on a map, you see they kind of went in a little bit of a circle. It wasn't a big circle, a little circle, but they didn't really go far. And much of those years are not discussed in the Torah. We have a few stories that are highlighted. But in this week's Torah portion, it jumps from the story around how they got into the 40 years of wandering to what happens year 40, what happens at the end. So let me set this up for you. Here's the scene. Here's the setting. It was a dark and stormy night. No, I'm kidding. Here's the setting of the Torah portion. This is year 40. Welcome. That was a quick, if this was a movie, it would just come up with a screen and say 40 years later and just pick up the story. So this is what's going on. So it's the end of the 40 years. And it's the first day of the month of Nisan. It's the first day of the month of Nisan, 40 years after the Exodus. And what happens is that a very special person passes away. The Torah tells us about their passing and about the aftermath, and this would prove to be very, very significant. So who passes away? none other than Miriam. Miriam Hanaviah. Miriam, the prophet, the prophetess, the prophet, who was a righteous person. She was, of course, a member of the very special family that included her, Miriam, Aaron the high priest, and Moses. Moses speaks for himself, right? Moses. Famously, it was Miriam who persuaded her parents to not divorce or to remarry after Pharaoh's decree. Her parents, Yocheved and Amram, they wished to call it quits. They were done. They were not interested in continuing to have children, to be together. Why? Because Pharaoh had decreed that the boys should be put to death. So Miriam famously said to her parents, "You guys are worse than Pharaoh, because Pharaoh only decreed that the boys shouldn't live. But if you divorce, then that means that not only the boys won't survive, but there won't be any girls either. So you guys are even more harsh than Pharaoh." And with that, it was enough that her parents remarried, and they had another child, and it was Moshe, and she, of course, watched him as he was floating down the Nile River in the Moses basket. All right, Miriam is a very special person. By the splitting of the sea, it's Miriam who packs tambourines, musical instruments, because she knows something magical is going to happen. And when that sea splits, the men are singing in a choir, but she has the women playing instruments. And they're all, in addition to singing, they're playing musical instruments and thanking God for surviving. Miriam is a critical leader of the Jewish people. And in this week's Torah portion, we read of her passing. And the Torah says that Miriam passes away. And immediately following that, this is Nisan in the year 2488 of the Jewish years. The Exodus happened in 2448, 2448. 40 years later, it's 2488. 2488, Nisan, 40 years after that, it's the month of the Exodus, she passes away. And immediately, the Torah turns to the next piece of the story. The Torah says, what happened next? What happens? The people complain to Moshe. They complain, one second. Yeah. They complain to Moshe and Aaron. They say, we need water. We're desperate for water. You got to make it happen. What, we're supposed to die in the desert without water? How are we going to live without water? Which is understood by our sages to explain what happened when Miriam passed away. You see, you might be wondering, and you might know this already, but you might have wondered at some point, what did the Jews drink for 40 years? Right? Aside from schnapps, right? What did the Jews drink for 40 years? Schnapps and kichel. When I was a kid, I used to go to shul, an old-timers minyan. These were individuals, some were Holocaust survivors. I would go there in the morning. I was a little kid. Very, very special individuals. But every day, every morning, after davening, after shacharis, the morning prayers, they would have kichel. You know what kichel is? It's like, how do you even describe kichel? It's like a pastry with a little sugar on it, a little sweet, maybe not so sweet.
Like biscotti?
No. It's like very flaky. It's very airy. Sometimes it's shaped like almost like a bow tie. Huh?
Puffy and airy, the bow tie ones. I know those.
The bow tie, yeah.
Yeah, they're called bow ties.
Bow ties, yeah. Like not the bow tie pasta. Listen.
They were round with a little sugar in the middle.
Sometimes round with sugar. Different styles, different places. And they used to say l'chaim, a little schnapps, a little l'chaim, and a little. This was like 7 o'clock in the morning, 6:45, 7 a.m. That's the way you got. This is it. That's like power breakfast. All right. So as a kid, I remember we went for the kichel, not for the schnapps, but whatever. Okay. So what's the point? The point is, you might have wondered, right? What did they drink? What did they drink? Not only in the morning. What did they drink? For 40 years they were in the desert. What did they drink? Yeah, it's an arid environment. What they were like.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Isn't it true that wherever Miriam was, there was a well, and when she died?
Yes, excellent. That's exactly what I'm getting to. So our sages tell us that there was a special well, a be'er. In Hebrew, well is, the word for well is be'er. There's a special be'er, a well, that traveled along with the Jewish people. And it took on the form of, in the form of a rock. It was a traveling rock that produced water, and it was a well. We would call it today perhaps rolling rock. Whatever. Anyway, so it's that was
Rolling Stone.
A Rolling Stone. Oh, even better. What am I thinking? Right, the Rolling Stone. Not the Stones, that came later, but the Rolling Stone. And we're going to discuss this in a minute. I'll show you some text on it that gives some more detail. But what happened was that when Miriam passes away 40 years into the travels, suddenly, immediately, the water dries up. No more water. And they panic. The people panic. Why? As Ray said, the water, and they didn't know this. This is amazing. For 40 years, they had no idea in whose merit they had water. But when she passed away and the water dried out, they knew exactly why they had the water for the 40 years. It was in honor of Miriam. Remember I told you before, Miriam washed her brother in the Nile River? She was connected with water. She had the relationship with water, and that was her, in her zchut, in her merit, the Jews drank. The Jews had water. When she passed away, the water dries up, and now the people start complaining. We're going to get into the next piece of the story in a moment, but first I want to share my screen with you, and let's do some texts. Let's see if I can find it. Here it is. Let's do some texts together. Okay. Chukat-Balak, let's jump in. All right, some preamble, more preamble. Okay, text 1a. This is really cool. This is from the Talmud. Rosita, text 1a. Please, if you will, do us the honor. Please read this text.
The rabbis taught 10 things were created on the eve of the Shabbat at twilight. They are the well, manna, the rainbow, the writing instruments, the tablets, the sepulchre of Moses, and the cave in which Moses and Eliyahu stood, the opening of the donkey's mouth, and the opening of the earth's mouth to swallow up the wicked.
Thank you. I love this list for the very simple reason that, you ever been to like Ripley's Believe It or Not, like that tourist attraction? They have it in various cities. They have it in New York, London. I'm sure they have it in Vegas or Orlando. Yeah, it's a touristy thing. I've been there before in Manhattan. We took our teens there on for the Chabad teen group a few years ago. Very, very interesting. Like very, like odd stuff. This is kind of like your Jewish or biblical list of curiosities, right? All of these things are miraculous, right? They're all the well. Which well? Okay, you know what, Rosita, one more. The first item is the well. Let's just see what Rashi says on this, yeah.
Well, this refers to the well of Miriam, the rock from which Moshe brought out water. It was round and sieve-like, and it went along with them wherever they would go. Thank you. That's Rashi's description.
In fact, in the Hebrew, which I love, umit galgel. David and or Yonah, tell us please what mitgalgel means. What does it mean? Hold on, you gotta unmute yourself. Rolling.
Like rolling stone.
Like rolling. That's where I got it from. I'm just quoting Rashi. See, you guys think I'm joking. I'm not even joking. Look, the translation says it went along with them. That's a very non-fun translation. The Hebrew is mitgalgel, which means it rolled along with them. That's a much better visual for me. Okay, what's the point? The point is that this well was miraculous, and it's one of the 10 miracle items that God created Friday afternoon, the eve of Shabbat at twilight. You know what that means? Like right at the border between Friday and Shabbat, right before Shabbat began, right as the sun is setting. Maybe it's not Shabbat, maybe it is Shabbat. This is where the miracle things happen. I'm going to explain the significance of that in a moment, but let's go through the list. The well, miracle. Manna from heaven, miracle. The rainbow, miraculous sign. Writing. You think, what's the miracle with writing? Not so fast. Writing means the inscription, the engraving of the tablets. The engraving of the tablets was miraculous. It went through and through. It wasn't just engraved like a half an inch deep or even an inch deep. The engraving on the tablets, the Ten Commandments, right? Engraved on the tablets, it went all the way through. What's interesting is, think about the letter Mem, a Schloss Mem, or Mem Sofit, right? Think of a final Mem. What does it look like? It looks like a square. So if you engrave a square through and through, what's going to happen? Help me out. The middle piece, what's going to happen? It's going to fall out.
You get a hole.
You're going to get a hole. But the middle piece, the middle stayed, it hovered. How did it happen? Magnets. I'm kidding. Not magnets. It happened because it happened due to a miracle. And that's why it's a miracle.
Didn't it also read the same way front
Yes.
and back on the stones?
Yes, and you could read it right. So if you also have something that goes through and through, one way it would read correctly, the other way it would be the backwards image, but it read, as David pointed out correctly, it read accurately or correctly on both sides. Once again, a miracle. The writing instruments, I don't recall Rashi's explanation of what that is. The tablets, of course, the tablets themselves. The I don't even know, sepulcher? In the Hebrew it's easier, kivro, which means the burial place of Moses.
Sepulcher.
Sepulcher? How do you pronounce
Yes.
it?
Yes.
And what does it mean? Does it mean like where he's interred?
No, something that I think you hold, like the sepulcher is something you hold, like the.
I'll tell you, the
Can't
Hebrew
have-
says kivro, which means the burial place. I don't know.
In Spanish, it's sepulcro. It's a burial place.
Oh, it is a
burial
burial. Okay, so like the burial place, the resting place of Moses, which is miraculous. We don't know where it is. It's been a mystery all these years.
It's a tomb you can walk into.
Oh, okay, there you go.
It's
That
one
makes
of those,
sense.
It's one of those old, like you see them in old cemeteries that
Yeah.
you can walk into.
Got it. Yeah, so it's like a room with the deceased. Okay, and the cave in which Moses and Elijah stood. There were Moses. Remember when God puts him in the cleft of the rock and passes before him and says, "You can't see me, my face, but only my back." And Elijah also with the tempest and God wasn't in the tempest and the noise, but only the still silent voice. All right, whatever. Various miraculous displays happened in a cave. The opening of the donkey's mouth, which happens in the second half of this week's Torah portion, Balak, where Balaam, the evil prophet, he has bad intentions, and God eventually has his own donkey setting him straight or trying to set him straight, and that doesn't work, but the donkey talks. This was the forerunner, of course, of Shrek. But that was a miracle. The opening of the earth's mouth to swallow up the wicked in the story of Korach, which we read last week, as the earth opens up. So these are 10 miracles, 10 miraculous things, items, phenomena that God creates. So why is it at Shabbat at twilight? Why was it created then? What does that even mean? So here's the deal. Anything that needs to be created can't be on Shabbat because God didn't create on Shabbat. But these are things that are not natural or normal. These are not mundane things. So they're not created during the normal 6 days of the week, but they can't be created on Shabbat either. So they're created like in the moment right before Shabbat. So it's still the moment of create. You're still creating, but it's already got that Shabbat holier aura, which is why that was the perfect time to create these miraculous items. So let's get back to our point. The point is that the well of Miriam was predestined from the beginning of time, or before the beginning of time, actually. But by the beginning of time. Let's day number 6. It unfolds in this timeline for 40 years. It provides hydration for the Jewish people. After 40 years, she passes away. 40 years of wandering, Miriam passes away, and the well dries up, which leads the people, as I mentioned before, to complain or to panic. Or panic and then complain. Both are true. And they go to Moses and Aaron and say, what are we supposed to do? We're going to die. So, Moses and Aaron petition God. So, text 2a. David Lozano, are you up to reading? Take it away. You're next on my list.
And Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly unto the door of the tent of meeting, and fell upon their faces. And the glory of God appeared unto them. And God spoke unto Moses, saying, Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and your brother Aaron, and speak to the rock in their presence, so that it will give forth its water. You shall bring forth water for them from the rock, and the congregation and their livestock to drink.
Beautiful, thank you. So what happens? Moses and Aaron bring the complaint of the people to God, and God says, don't worry. All right, temporary glitch in the, or not glitch, temporary pause in the well. Don't worry, we're going to regenerate the water. Miriam passed away. It's no longer in her merit. So it's going to be in your merit or Aaron's merit. I think it was pretty much Moses' merit that it renewed itself. So God says to Moses, look, take your staff, gather the people, go with Aaron, speak to the rock, and then it's going to produce water. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, a miracle, but pretty straightforward. All right, I love that. I love that little header there, Rock of Outrages, right? Rock of Ages? That's fantastic. Okay, let's do text 2b. You know what, David? You're on a roll. Let's, if you don't mind, please read text 2b.
And Moses took the rod from before God as he commanded him. Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock, and he said to them, Now listen, you rebels, can we draw water for you from this rock? Moses raised his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, when an abundance of water gushed forth, and the congregation and their livestock drank.
Beautiful. What could go wrong? So God says, get water from the rock. Moses gets everyone together, and he makes water come out of the rock. And you would think all is good. Right now you have an abundance of water, not just some water, not just a trickle. There's an abundance of water gushing forth. The people are drinking. The livestock are drinking. Fantastic. You know, maybe even they're creating like waterfalls. Like that's already next level. When you have like extra water, then you start getting landscaping involved. You call your landscaping people and you create that like infinity waterfall situation in your front lawn. I mean, they have abundance of water. That's it. They had even like fountains where you throw the coins in, right? Okay. Perhaps not confirm that last piece, but maybe. So all seems good, right? Everything seems okay. Everyone's got water, but then the other shoe drops, and that's text 2c. David, if you don't mind, one more. This is where the other shoe drops.
God said to Moses and Aaron, Since you did not have faith in me to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly to the land which I have given them. These are the waters of strife, where the children of Israel contended with God, and he was sanctified through them.
Suddenly, shots are fired. Suddenly, God speaks harshly to Moses and Aaron, and he says, you know what? Y'all did wrong. Y'all messed up. I'm paraphrasing. You didn't have faith in me. You didn't have faith in me to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel. Therefore, you're not going to the land of Israel. And it seems, it's clear from this story that God is now punishing Moshe and Aaron and not letting them go into the land. We'll focus on Moshe. Not letting Moshe go into the land. Why? Because of something that happened with producing water from the rock. The question that every commentary asks, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you all. The question that every biblical commentary asks and attempts to address is this one. What in the world did Moshe do wrong? What happened? Hold on one second. Wait. Hold on. One second. What in the world did Moshe do wrong? Think about it. The people needed water. God says, take your staff, go to the rock. Moses hits the rock a few times. The water comes out. What could go wrong? And yet, in the aftermath, God chastises Moshe and Aaron, and he says, you're not going to the land. Again, focusing on Moshe now. Moshe is not allowed into the land of Israel. Because of what? What did he do? Seems like he followed orders. Now, one second. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to tell you what we're going to do for the remainder of the class. The second question that I'm going to ask is this. The question is, after all is said and done, assuming we get a good answer as to why Moshe was punished, is there a timeless lesson that we can draw from this story? Is there some sort of timeless instruction, some sort of message, take-home message that you and I can apply to our own lives from this narrative? The answer, of course, is yes. It has to be yes, because Torah means instruction. Torah is our life manual. So if it's in Torah, if it's in the user manual, then it must have a message for our lives today, in 2020. Right now, there is a message for you in your life, for me in my life tonight. So we're going to keep on working this until we understand the answer to both questions. Number one, what did Moshe do wrong? And number two, what does it teach us? Now, let me tell you the outline of what we're going to do from now until the end of the class. I am going to present to you 4 of the many answers that are given amongst the classic commentaries and amongst the mystics, amongst the Jewish spiritual teachings, to explain what Moshe did wrong. 4 explanations of this story, from a very basic explanation to a more elaborate explanation, to a mystical explanation, to an allegorical explanation. We're going to go through the progression, and hopefully through this process you're going to see and discover a few things. Number one, how beautiful and rich Torah is. You know, how you can understand that on so many different levels. That's one thing. Number two, the teachings themselves. Every explanation has its own angle, has its own message. And hopefully by the end of the class, you and I will be able to understand it so well, the story and all of the different explanations that I'm going to present tonight, that we'll be able to weave together seemingly very different explanations, weave them together in a singular narrative. If what I just said you're a little bit confused about, don't worry about it. I'm just telling you what we're going to do, which is give 4 answers, show the depth and the breadth of Torah scholarship, and hopefully weave them together to show how even different explanations all speak to the same truth. Does that make sense what I just said? All roads lead back. So from one story it diverges, but ultimately it also comes back into a singular place. And of course we're going to learn a life lesson or multiple life lessons from this. So that's what we're going to do. So the first thing I want to do is explore, got to tell you, it's been said, Moshe made one mistake. But when you look through the commentaries, and the commentaries blew it up into thousands of mistakes, because every commentary has a different angle on what Moshe did wrong, which means that if you study all the commentaries, you have dozens of mistakes that Moshe made. Poor guy, he did one thing, but based on all the Mefarshim, based on all the commentaries, he did dozens of things wrong. Okay, I don't want to fall into that trap of like making things worse for Moshe by going through multiple explanations of what he did wrong. Nonetheless, we're going to stick with 4. And through this process, it's not about Moshe doing something wrong, but it's about a beautiful lesson for us about how to influence people in a healthy way. Okay, the most basic explanation, and Ray, jump in to tell me, because I think that this is what you're going to say. Ray, go for it. What did Moshe do wrong? God said, get water from the rock. He got water from the rock. What did he do wrong? Go ahead. Hold on, you're muted. Hold on. Go for it. Wait.
Yes, he hit the rock when he should have spoken to it.
Perfect. The most basic, well-known explanation of what Moshe did wrong is God had told him to go speak to the rock and get the water. And what Moses did was he hit the rock, and not only did he hit the rock twice to boot, right? He hits it twice and produces the water. God says, you messed up. You're supposed to speak to the rock, not hit the rock. Okay, a few things that we might ask on this answer. We're gonna read this inside, but I'll tell you this: if you can produce water from a rock by hitting it, that's also kind of cool. What's the difference whether you hit it or speak with it? Doesn't seem to be much of a difference. Also, you might have noticed. You know what? I'm not going to tell you. Let's read this inside. It's the Rashbam who gives this answer. Rashbam was one of the grandsons of Rashi. Okay, Rashi's daughter's son. So Rashi had a few daughters. One of his daughters had a son who's known as the Rashbam. I'm going to share my screen with you, and let's read the Rashbam inside together. Nope, we already did that. Oh, text 3, I'm going to read it. 70 facets to the Torah. We've said this many times. Many different ways of interpretation. Okay. That's like a introduction. By the way, we're going to have a bunch of different explanations. 4, not 70, but 4. Okay, explanation number 1. Here we go. This is, again, Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir. His mother was Yocheved, the daughter of Rashi. Okay, here we go. Rashbam says, Ray, go ahead and read this one. He erred.
He erred with regard to God's instructions to take the staff. He did not believe that he would bring forth water from the rock by speaking to it, only by striking it as he had at Rephidim. As for God's instructions, speak to the rock, he understood that God wanted him to speak to the rock by hitting it. God ultimately conceded and brought forth water as he hit it. Yet Moses was punished, for God is particular with the righteous. Thus God told him, because you did not believe in me to sanctify me by speaking to the rock, because he holds the righteous to account for deviating even a hairbreadth.
Thank you. That is the classic explanation. What did Moshe do wrong? Right? He hit the rock. Instead of speaking to the rock, God had told him to speak. He hit. You're going to ask the question that I asked. He asks it here, right? What's the big deal? Who cares? Speaking, hitting, whatever. He got the water. Nope. Why? God, here, I'm going to highlight the relevant line here. For God is particular with the righteous. I want to give you an example. If you have a piece of coal for a barbecue, you know what I'm talking about? Like the charcoal, like the little things, the squares, yeah? And you open up your bag of, what's that company? King's, what is it called?
Kingsford.
Kingsford, okay. Perfect. So you open it up, yeah? And you're inspecting your little squares, whatever they're called, briquettes or whatever, briquettes. And you notice, did I pronounce that wrong? Did I get that wrong? Or whatever. And you find one has like a scratch in it. Are you going back to the store and returning it because it has a scratch in it? You're probably wondering what I'm even saying, because who cares about the scratch? That's actually my point. But if you go and buy a diamond, yeah, and you take it home, and you notice there's a nice scratch down the middle, you haven't touched it yet, you take it out of the box, you have a diamond ring, an engagement ring, let's say, you're going to give to your significant other, and you pull it out in anticipation, and you see there's a line in it, guess where that's going, my friends? Straight back to the jeweler. And you know why? Because you hold a more precious, more beautiful, more refined item to a higher standard than something less refined. So a coal, a piece of charcoal, who cares? Mark it up, cut it up. It doesn't make a difference. It's charcoal. It's not going to ruin anything. But if it's on a diamond, it definitely makes a difference. It makes a big difference. So the same action that for you and I would be a miracle, we would be called a prophet, we would be who knows what, producing water from a rock by hitting it, yeah, you're going to get some press, some good press on that. So for us, it would be a mitzvah. For Moshe, it was an indiscretion, because Moses is held to a higher standard. Deviating even a hair's breadth, even one iota from God's command, is grounds for repercussion. So God says, speak, he hit, you're out. Understand the significance of this. Understand how tricky this was for Moshe to get right. Because why? As the Rashbam said, God had told him to take his staff. God said, take your staff and then speak to the rock. Moses heard staff. If I'm just supposed to speak to the rock, why did God tell me to take the staff? So he was confused. He was, I'm not going to say misled. I don't mean to suggest that God intentionally misled him. I'm just saying that he believed, according to the Rashbam, that when God said, take the staff and speak to the rock, he thought, communicate with your staff. All right, I'll let this rock know what to do. Boom, I'm going to give you a clap. Yeah, I'm going to use my staff to communicate. That's a way to communicate on some level. Listen, how are you going to speak to the rock anyway? Rocks don't have ears. So if God says take the staff, he wants me to hit. And the second point to explain Moshe's behavior was he thought it was going to be the same story as Refidim. I need to explain what that means. By the way, what I just told you is Ramban Nachmanides. Look what Ramban, another commentary, Nachmanides says. I'm going to read this quickly. Having commanded Moses to take the staff, there's an implication that he should hit something with it. If God only wanted speech, why would there be a staff in his hand? You see? You see what Nachmanides is saying? Moshe made a very well justified error. In other words, he had good reason to believe he was supposed to hit it. After all, he was told to take a staff. And furthermore, all the way back 40 years prior, soon after the Exodus from Egypt, the Jews had a water crisis then. This was when they first started traveling. This is before the Miriam's well produced water. And the Jews complained there was no water. They were out of Egypt, they had no water. They were out of Egypt and out of water. Take a look. I'm going to read this very quickly. This is from Exodus 17. This is right after the actual Exodus. Take a look. The entire community of the children of Israel journeyed from the desert of Sin, not like English place, to the travels by the mandate of God. They encamped, here we go, in Refidim. So Refidim is where now they're encamped. And there's no water. So the people quarreled with Moses, and they basically said, we need to drink. All right, let's fast forward. We don't need to get into all the back and forth. Here's what God says. Take a look. Take a look at God's response. God said to Moses, pass before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take into your hand your staff, with which you struck the Nile, and go. Look at this last paragraph. Behold, I shall stand there before you on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, and the people will drink. Do you realize what's going on? 40 years prior, when they originally had no water, all the canteens and all the refillable water bottles that they had taken out of Egypt had dried up. They're now in Refidim. There's no water. They complain. Moses elevates the complaint to the general manager, to the boss, which is God. And what does God say? Take your staff and strike the rock. 40 years later, Miriam passes away. The water dries up. God says, take your staff and speak to the rock. Do you understand how Moshe didn't even hear speak to the rock? Number one, he was told to take a staff. Number two, 40 years prior, he had to strike it. He went on the same news as before. Yet, the bottom line is, Moshe deviated from the command. And even if you're going to tell me, boy, it was an honest mistake. It was even a little mistake. It got the water eventually. All true. But for Moses, as the Rashbam said, he is looked at with a magnifying glass. Even this small indiscretion is a big deal for Moses. Make sense? Any questions, comments so far?
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so looking at this passage in Exodus, it appears that, it seems straightforward. Moses is concerned. It says in the verse above, the people will stone me. God says what he says. So when you go back to the original passage that you read this time, when Moses addresses the people before he strikes the rock, after Miriam has passed in the second accounting, I would say that maybe he's visibly angry, or he is speaking to them in something other than a nice tone.
Yes.
And is that part of his sin?
Good, excellent. Angry. That is the next explanation that we're going to cite. That's explanation number 2. So, but perfect segue, but right before we get there, let me just wrap up explanation number 1. So, we started this journey by presenting the story and asking the question, what did he do wrong? We now have one answer. One answer is, he hit the rock instead of speaking with the rock. And although he might have been justified, and although he might have been under the assumption that was what he was supposed to do, the bottom line is, it wasn't. He made a mistake. Hence, God says you're not going to the land of Israel. Somebody just had a question.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Okay, so what? So Aaron is not allowed in the land of Israel either.
Correct. Aaron passes away before Moses. Aaron passes away in this week's Torah portion. Moses has another book, the Deuteronomy. He has some more time with us. Aaron passes away shortly thereafter.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Sure.
Another question?
Yeah, for
Are
sure.
there, the issue with the staff, did he not have a staff for all of the miracles he performed?
It's a great question. The commentators discuss this. Some say the staff, it seemed to imply he was supposed to hit it. Others say no, he took the staff other times when he didn't hit anything. He had the staff as a sign of leadership, as a sign of, maybe holding it up to show that God was doing miracles. So it's a mixed message. For the plagues, most of the time, the staff did hit something. But there were many times that the staff didn't. So, yeah, he wasn't supposed to use the staff to hit this time. But he heard staff. He heard stone and water. He went back to his prior experience. He hit it. It was a mistake. You might say honest mistake, innocent mistake. Okay, but a mistake for Moses, it was a big deal. Let's take a look at the second explanation. All right, we're gonna go pick up the pace a little bit. Second explanation. I'm gonna read this. Take a look at what the Midrash says. This is so interesting, and this is exactly what Dr. Maxey was saying before. To what was Moses analogous? To a king who placed his son under the charge of a tutor and instructed him, "Do not call my son a moreh." The king says, "Whatever you do, don't call my son a moreh." What does moreh mean? It is like the Greek word one shouts to a fool. I don't know how to pronounce it. Moros. Moros being the Greek word for dull, slow, or the opposite of bright. So in modern terminology, it might be something like the word moron. I mean, I'm not, but it's like a fool, right? Once it happened that the tutor ended up calling the boy moreh, a derogatory term. The king said to him, "With all my soul I ordered you," and said, "Do not call my son a moreh," and yet you call him a moreh? A wise man, if you're so wise and he's a fool, then a wise man has no business with a fool. In other words, you're fired. Right? The moment you cross that line, that was the one line you were not supposed to cross. You were not supposed to call my son, a derogatory term. The moment you do that, you're out. You're out of a job. So the Midrash says, "So it is written, and God spoke to Moses and to Aaron and commanded them to the children of Israel." This is when he first called them to speak to. This is before the Exodus. This is when God first appoints Moses and Aaron to be the leaders. So it says, and God spoke to Moses and Aaron and commanded them to the children of Israel. So what does that mean? It's very vague. What did he command? He told them, this is the missing information. This is all the way back in the beginning of the book of Exodus. He told them, "Do not call my children fools." Once they antagonized him at the waters of strife, that's the story that by Miriam's passing, Moses said to them, "Hear now, you morim, fools." God then said to him, "With all my being I commanded you and told you, do not call my children morim. Now that you've called out moreh, a wise person does not go along with a fool." And God says, basically, you're now out of a job. So that's the second explanation. Second explanation comes from the Medrash. It says it wasn't about hitting the rock, speaking to the rock. It was about how he addressed the people. And just so you know, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. Let me go back to the beginning. This is the relevant text, 2b, from today's class. This is from our Torah portion. Take a look at this middle paragraph right here. This is what you need to know. Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock, and he said to them, Moses, "Now listen, you rebels, you fools. Can we draw?" So that was it. That was it. He said that. He's done. That's the second explanation. Make sense? Yes? Okay. Pretty straightforward. So we have two explanations. One that says that his indiscretion was that he hit the rock instead of speaking to it, and the other one is that he spoke not nice to the people. I told you, Moses did one thing. We already have two things that he did wrong, based on which commentary you explore. I'm going to give you a mystical explanation. Hold on. Give me a second here. I'm going to skip. Okay. Explanation number 3. This doesn't explain the... Hold on. I'm going to stop sharing. I don't want you to read yet. Okay. This third explanation does not explain the literal contours of the story like the first two explanations have done. The first two explanations fit well with the narrative. Moses is told to do something by God. Either he deviates from the plan by hitting instead of speaking, or he yells at the people and calls them a not nice term. So, but either way it fits into the narrative, and we understand why God, to one extent or another, we understand why God came back to Moses and said, thank you for getting the water, but here's your retirement package, and that's it. Fine. So the third explanation, however, is completely abstract. This is spiritual, it's mystical, it's Kabbalistic, and it takes the story from its literal understanding to a mystical place. Now, this is cool because you could see how Torah could be understood on many different levels. Like if you were an angel studying Torah in heaven, right? How would you study Torah? About Moses and rocks and water? What do you know from rocks and water? You're an angel. So there's another way to study it. There's a way to study this spiritually. Take a look. It's such a beautiful idea. Let's go to sharing my screen. I'll keep on reading. Okay. Nope. Sorry. Let me not share. Let me unshare for a second. Here's what you need to know to get this mystical explanation. Few points. Number one, water is analogous to Torah. So when you hear water from a mystical place, water, your ears buzz with Torah. So, Reeve, you want to say hi? No? Okay. All right. So, love you. So, water is symbolic of Torah. Why? Water always goes down. You can see it. Water always goes down, and Torah was given by God to us below. So, water is like Torah. That's the first point. What's the rock? The rock is a hard surface. The rock is using effort. So now that I've given you these basic ideas, now let me share with you once again my screen, and now we can study explanation numeral uno dos tres, number 3. Okay, here we go. Okay. Take a look. This is very cool. This is from the second Chabad Rebbe, known as the Mittler Rebbe. The concept of pilpul, a method of study, was introduced by Moses when he hit the rock with his staff, for which he was punished. For had he spoken to the rock, the pilpul would not exist. However, he deviated from the instructions and hit the rock with his staff twice, which is an allusion to the idea of the pilpul. What is pilpul? That's probably a necessary term to understand in this. Pilpul means a non-straightforward analysis of a topic, which is done very often in Torah study, especially in Talmud study, where you analyze a topic through questions and false leads and comparing and contrasting different ideas. Pilpul is it's a complicated way of study. When I say complicated, it's involved. You know what? It's kind of like tonight. We didn't come into the class and start off by saying, oh, here's the story and here's why it happened. No, we have questions, we have sources, we go back and forth, we put puzzle pieces together, right? That's what we call pilpul. He says, the Mittler Rebbe, the Rabbi Dover of Lubavitch, says that pilpul is born when Moses hits the rock. Had Moses just spoken to the rock gently, and the rock would have effortlessly produced water, you know what would have happened? It would only have been symbolic of Torah being produced from the source in an easy and smooth way. But once Moses hits the rock, that becomes the source for producing great insight from a place of difficulty, from a place of questions, from a place of contradictions, from a place of false starts and misleads. Here we go. The rock refers to a hard flintstone, which is spiritually derived from the hidden element of fire, and so represents a state of concealment and hardness. Likewise, as the Hebrew words for hard and question are related, a question, kushya, is hard, kasha, like a rock, like rock, in that it represents the concealment of light. When Moses hit the rock with his staff, the waters of wisdom emerged from a state of utter concealment to revealed light, which is the purpose of the pilpul, to walk in darkness until one reaches light. So this is a third explanation. What's the deal with Moses hitting the rock? What does it mean? Why did it happen? And what does it mean for us? Right? Moses hitting the rock is basically giving birth to a new way, to a new methodology of Torah study, analysis, of teaching, of producing wisdom. Not in a way that's straightforward and easy, but in a way that's complicated. In a way that's where you go down. It's like you start in a maze. You ever walk those corn mazes? You know, like in a field, you walk the maze and you can't see anything? I haven't, but I've always wanted to. It looks so much fun. So imagine, like, you know, when you emerge from that into that glorious light, you know, or whatever, you're now free of the maze. That's what pilpul is like. It's like you're going down passageways. You turn this way, dead end. That way, dead end. Oh, finally found it. It's literally like a maze. I'll give you an example. If you've ever been to my classes when we discuss, let's say, modern ethical questions, like lab-grown meat, and our question is it kosher or not kosher? Or self-driving cars, how should they be programmed to protect the passenger or the pedestrian when only one can be protected? When we have questions like that, right, new modern day questions that there's no way it could have been discussed in prior generations because the technology didn't exist. Genetic cloning, right? Cloning or all of these things. So how do we go about finding the halacha? You take prior cases, you take the precedent, and you start comparing and contrasting. Does this work? Does this match our case? What can we draw from this? Does it work or not? What can we draw from that? That's what we call pilpul. So you don't know where you're going to end up. You start analyzing. You start saying, well, this case seems similar. This case we do know. It's obviously not lab-grown beef, but it's something that may speak to something related to this case. Does it work? Yeah. And then, no, it doesn't, because there's a difference. And that difference is a deal breaker. No, we got to find another source. Then you move on to the next one. That process of methodology is like hitting the rock to produce the water. It's difficult. It's kasheh. It's hard. Kushya. It's filled with questions. It's a maze. But at the end, you get a beautiful light. So that is the third explanation of what happened with the hitting of the rock. What happens is Moses opens up a new form of wisdom, a new fountain of wisdom that's not straightforward, but it's fraught with a little bit difficulty. It comes from darkness, and from that emerges light. So was it a mistake or not? Maybe originally the intention was that all ideas should come easily. The fact that now it's not always so easy is a product of the hitting of the rock. The final point I want to mention, that's number 3. Let's talk about number 4. The final explanation we're going to explore is what I think is the most powerful, at least for me. And I think it's the one that's most easily digestible into an empowering takeaway message. Think of a rock as someone symbolic, it's again symbolism, symbolic of someone who might be difficult to work with. I don't mean only working like in a job, but I mean dealing with. Like a tough nut to crack, you ever hear that expression? Like a difficult person. A difficult person. That's a rock, right? Hard. Like not easy. The question is, how do you get that person to produce that sweet water? How do you get that person to produce? Do you hit or do you speak? This is a question in life. When we encounter people that are difficult, do we shout? Do we use negative language? Do we use brute force? Or do we focus in a positive way on bringing out the best of the other individual? This is a tale of two approaches. We have God's approach. God says to Moses, there's a rock, and I want you to bring out water from this rock. And you're going to say that's not possible, and I'll tell you it's possible. But here's how I want you to do it, because the method is key. I want you to speak to the rock. And Moses goes ahead and takes his staff, and he hits the rock once and twice. And he got results. But you know what? You can scream at a child. You can punish a child and get results also. But you know what you haven't done? You haven't educated and you haven't influenced. If the only way that you see results with someone else is by using force, guess what? You haven't yet transformed. They're not transformed. They're not changed. So if you want obedience, right? If you want a certain behavior, you want a certain change, and you decide you're going to impose that on the other person, you're going to force them into it, guess what? They haven't changed. And who's to say they should change in the first place? That's a very valid question. But even if you say that objectively this is a better place to be, in other words, this is objectively a better place, water, it's a good thing. If you are forcing it, It's not coming from them. That is a flawed way of education. Now, you might call it old school, and it might be right. Maybe old school, the headmasters of the school used to use some force, and maybe the teachers used to use force, maybe parents used to use force. But we live in a different generation now. We live in a different generation. And what worked back then doesn't work today. And I'll tell you, I don't know if it ever worked, to be honest. I don't know if it ever worked. Because do people really change? Like, genuinely change due to force? No, they conform. Somebody is standing over you about to, God forbid, right? About to strike. So you might duck and cower. You might move into that space that they want you to move into. But it's not you moving into that space. And the moment they're gone, you're running away from there as fast as you can. That's not a healthy, that's dysfunctional. That's abusive. That's not where we want to be in any sort of understanding of influence. So when we talk about influence and what we're really, force can break a person or a child, God forbid, but it doesn't transform or change them. Very well put. Forcing, coercing is not change. That's not the same thing as change. And it's not transformation, and it's certainly not what we would call influence. If you want to have an influence on someone, it happens in a softer, more gentle fashion. Of course, when it comes to speech, there are different ways to speak. You can give encouraging words, you can give, a little bit, there are different ways of words. But one thing is for sure, words influence, not the stick. Not the stick. So here's the point. 40 years prior was the old generation. And the old generation, God did tell Moses, take your staff and hit the rock. Why? Only God knows why. Maybe that generation, they needed to know that, the law is the law. Maybe they needed that tough love or that tough authority. 40 years prior in Rephidim, God tells Moses, take your staff, hit the rock, and produce the water. But now it's 40 years later. By the way, then it was only in front of you may have noticed this, it was only the elders of the people that were gathered. You notice that? In Rephidim? I'm not going to share my screen with you. You can look it up. Exodus 17, I think. Yeah, Exodus 17. It was only the elders that were gathered when Moses hit the rock. Now it's all the people. And now it's 40 years later. Now it's not that generation. It's not that hardened, the generation of slaves. It's their children. And God says to this generation, the new generation, we live in a new era. It's 2020. Put down the stick. Well, okay, take the stick, but don't use the stick, right? Don't use the stick. Speak to the people. Sorry, speak to the rock. Let's stick with the original story, right? Speak to the rock to produce the water. Don't hit it. And what does Moses do? Falls back in old habits. And he hits the rock once. A few drops come out. Not good enough. Hits it again. And now the water comes out. Did you change the rock? No. You beat up the rock. You didn't change the rock. The goal is not beating up the other. The goal is transformation. Transformation happens from the inside out. What is the best way to encourage someone to change from the inside out? With love and encouragement, not with force from the outside. Anything that's coming from the outside, by definition, means you don't have the change, because change is the transformation is on the inside. If it's from the outside, it's being compelled. It's coercion. It's it's not change. It's not transformation. It's conformity. It's not transformation. The goal is transformation. That the rock should produce water of its own accord. And that happens through speaking. So, in the final analysis, I want to weave together all four explanations. So, Hauptkap. In the final analysis, based on the fourth idea that we just explained, we now understand how we got to a beautiful place from all of the questions and all of the different approaches that we took, which is explanation number 3. Right? We had a bunch of different ideas, and now I'm going to weave them together, but we understand how pilpul works. Right? I'm mirroring the process, which is explanation number 3. And we now understand what was Moshe's mistake, if we could say such a thing. We're not on the level of Moses, but for him, what was his mistake? Number one, he hit instead of speaking. And number two, what did he say? Morim. He called them a negative term. He was still using force. The first two explanations are the same. The idea of him hitting versus speaking and using that negative language, it's all the same thing. It means that he was still using a harsh approach. The harsh approach may have worked back in the shtetl. The harsh approach and maybe it didn't even then. But maybe that's what they used back then. And maybe that's what they used back in the 40s or the 50s also, or maybe even the 60s. But we live in 2020. And today, if you want to influence the next generation, if you want to really educate your children, if you want to really transform someone else's life, it's not going to happen by yelling and shouting. And it's not going to happen through a stick. Put down the stick and have a conversation. Communicate with them from a place of love and understanding, concern, and care. And that's how results happen. When I say results, that's how change happens. Transformation from the inside out. You force someone, you hit them, it's not going to work. You yell at them, you call them names, not going to work. Right? Intimidate them, not going to work. You may get short-term results, but it's not a long-term. It's no education there. There's no education. You just twisted someone's arm. Mazel tov. So what did you accomplish? Nothing. Nothing was changed. You just twisted someone's arm and forced them into a situation. There's no accomplishment there. So, explanation number 1 and 2 are the same. Moshe hits instead of speaking. Moshe calls them a negative name. It's all the old school approach. Right? It's not how you produce water anymore. That's not how you ever really are supposed to produce water. You got to speak to the rock with love. And if that's not your thing, all right, so then pass the baton to the next leader who's ready to work with the people on that level. And here we see the beautiful depth of Torah, that you can go from multiple explanations, both practical explanations, mystical explanations, and you draw from it the same lesson, the same powerful modern lesson. You could strike the same rock and produce multiple streams of water, but ultimately they flow in the same direction. And the takeaway message for us, it should be obvious. I've already stated it a few times, but just in case. The message for us, the timeless message from Torah, our life manual. You ever wanted an instruction manual with life? You got it. It's called the Torah. What's the message for this week? The message is we need to always seek the betterment of others, but not in a way that is harsh, and not in a way that doesn't help them undergo that transformation. The goal in education is transformation. The goal in parenting is transformation. The goal in mentoring is transformation. The goal in every communication is hopefully inspiring the other person. It's all about influence. Influence and coercion are not the same thing. You force someone, you're not influencing them. You're forcing them. Influence and force are not the same thing. I think for a long time we made that mistake. But it's not too late. I don't mean we, you and I, but society, it's not too late. We can take a step back, take a deep breath, and ask ourselves a simple question. What is in the best interest of this other person, and how can I help them get to that place with love, care, and concern? When we do this, we will be that much better poised to really be effective in our influence. I want to see if there's one final text that we can read together. One final text to close it out. All right, here we go. I'm going to share my screen. This is the final text of today's class. Bear with me. Let's fast forward. Here we go. Text number 18. This is what the Rebbe writes. When words of rebuke are predicated on love, Ahavat Yisrael, love for a fellow Jew, or really for a fellow human being, then one's entire approach is radically different. Instead of reproaching, one wishes only to protect the other person from error and so on. In this case, it's no longer giving words of rebuke, but putting the other person on the right path. It follows then that the way one speaks is also radically different gently with pleasant words and ways of peace. I wish we could put this on every wall of every school, of every classroom, of every home with parents and children. It's not about rebuke. It's about helping someone get to a good place. And therefore, the approach that you take will automatically be a gentle one, with pleasant words, ways of peace. In this manner, then, first and foremost, it is easy to see that this approach is far more likely to bear tangible results, that one's words will be received. You shout, you mock, you yell, you hit, you make fun of, you demean, belittle. You're not influencing. You're not influencing at all. You're shaming. You're doing all sorts of things. You're probably traumatizing, but you're not influencing. Influence happens through love, predicated on love, care, and concern. If you really care about them, then you're going to speak to them like you really care about them. You just be genuine to how you feel about them. You care about them. You want them to produce water. Great. So show them that you care. No one cares. What is it? No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Something like that. But let's not take the harsh approach. One more meditation for parents. There was once a Chabad rabbi who wrote a letter to the Rebbe, or he said this face to face to the Rebbe. I heard this directly from the individual involved, who's still alive today. And he told the Rebbe that he had a challenge. He get very angry at his children sometimes, get very frustrated, and he wanted some tips to deal with this. The Rebbe said, when the neighbor's kid comes over, yeah, do you get angry with the neighbor's kid? Yell at the neighbor's kid? No, it's the neighbor's kid. Okay. You have to know that your children are not yours. They're God's children. You have no right to get angry at God's children. Yeah. They're God's children that have been entrusted to you for, to educate and to raise. But they're not yours to do whatever you want with. Right? It's not your possession. It's God's child. God's child, treat with respect. Treat with love. That's it for today. So what's the moral of the story? Don't hit the rock. Put the staff down. Maybe just for appearance purposes. Put the staff down. Speak with love to the rock. And this way we can influence each other. All right. That's it for tonight. Thank you very much for joining me for Torah studies. Along these lines, I want to encourage all of you. Do I have... gosh, I don't know where it is. I'm going to see if I can find it in the next 30 seconds. We have a powerful event coming up Monday night. You may have seen the email.
Yes.
It's called Healing the Divide. And it is with 3 individuals who helped Crown Heights heal after the race riots in the 1990s. These are people that worked extensively with the communities, with different communities, and bring people together. And they did a lot of work, and the work really did a lot of paying off. So, give me a second here. See if I can download this. Yeah. Download this. I'm hearing birds.
Yeah. Sweet.
The birds are chirping. It's nice. It's good to know that nature is still doing its thing.
Michigan birds.
Oh, nice. Michigan birds. Those are always the good ones. I'm kidding. Who knows, right? Okay. I mean, I'm assuming they're not good. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen with you one final time for tonight. Hopefully this comes through. Photos. Yeah. Do you see that? Healing the Divide? Can you... Okay, great. So this is it. Healing the Divide, the remarkable story of an unlikely trio who brought hope and healing to a divided city. New York City, Brooklyn, Crown Heights, 1990s race riots, Crown Heights riots. These are now, you might be wondering, trio, I only see 2 people. Okay. So this is These are two of the parties involved. We have Dr. Paul Chandler, Dr. David Laz, and Reverend Richard Green. So all three will be in person live on a Zoom broadcast, sharing their story about how they brought communities together back then, and how we can work toward healing and better understanding unity and love today as well in 2020. So I feel it's a very important event, and I encourage all of you to join. It's a free event. If you'd like to help us with the cost of putting it on, there's a sponsorship opportunity if you'd like to help out with that, but otherwise it is free and open to everyone. Please help spread the word and share the information about it. If you got the email, forward it to a friend. It's also on Facebook, on Intown Jewish Academy. The event is called Healing the Divide, so easy to find. So join us. It's going to be very special. Monday night at 8 p.m. All right, that is it. I am out of information, I think. Anyone else? Anyone else want to share something, ask something?
Goodbye.
Oh, so cute. Is that Nate? Hey, Nate. Nice to see you. Nate, how old are you? How old are you? 4 or 5? 2? Oh, wow. Look at that. My age was way off. That's
You want to show what we got? Look what we got.
What is it? Oh, you got the mugs. Nice. Love that. My pleasure. I'm so glad that it arrived. I am very, very happy that it arrived. Wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so that is...
Rabbi Ari, can I ask a very quick question?
Yes, absolutely.
So to piggyback on last night's class, if punishment is intrinsic and not extrinsic, and Moses was punished by God for hitting the rock, where's the intrinsic in that?
Oh, excellent question.
Or is that, we save that for another day?
No, it's a good question. You're asking a very good question, right? Is there an intrinsic element to that as well? I would say yes. If it's not extrinsic, it's intrinsic, especially the way we explained it tonight. If you're not inspiring, if you're better suited for one generation, if you're suited for one generation, you're not suited for the new generation, then you gotta pass the baton, right?
Okay.
I mean, that may still sound a bit extrinsic, but I think it's more of like understanding, what's effective. If it's effective, it's effective. If it's not effective, it's not effective. It's not a punishment. It's just a reality. We're in a new generation. 40 years ago, I told you to hit. Now, no hitting. Right now, speaking. If you didn't pick up on that nuance, Moses, God says, right? I told you to take the stick, but speak to the rock. If you just reverted back to what I told you 40 years earlier, that itself is a sign that you're very well suited for the outgoing generation, which is fine. It's not a knock. But it is what it is. It is what it is. You missed the nuance, right? Yeah, I said speak. You didn't speak. You hit. All right. What are you? It's not a punishment. It's not a punishment. It's a reality. Anyway, that's one way to look at it. I'm sure there's deeper ways, but that's the most immediate one that came to mind.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Good to see you all. Dr. Maxey, I recall now in my fog of last night that you mentioned you need a refuah shlema for your folks.
Yes, please.
All right. So let's all wish Dr. Maxey good health for the mishpacha, for her parents. They should be well and healthy, and we should have only blessings and only good, only happy things.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen.
Amen.
All right. Power of Torah study is great, and the power of collective positive blessings is great. So please God, things should be good. All right. Good to see everyone. Great to see you all. We'll see you soon. Lila Tov. Have a good night. Take care. Bye-bye.